start again. So if you were here yesterday, you'll recognise this presentation. I'm just going to briefly introduce the working group and go through what we're going to talk about today. So this is our programme for today. We've got 4 speakers lined up, and then we're going to have an open discussion about human traces and draw it all together at the end in a synthesis and basically just see what comes out of today. So the Human Traces Working Group is interested in the long legacy of pre-Anthropocene human impact. So we're interested in the changes that have arisen since humans emerged, and all the cultural and technological revolutions and changes that have impacted on the climate and the environment. And what we're interested in is how these have manifested in the sedimentary record around the world. So you can see the map there of human dispersal, and you can see that humans have moved around the globe at different times, and they will have had different impacts in different places, and these will have recorded in sedimentary records. What we're interested in is creating a global synthesis of these changes, and probably doing that through a regional view to try and capture all of these different changes. So that map came out of a previous working group called Aquatic Transitions, and Aquatic Transitions focused on lake sediment records, whereas with Human Traces we're hoping to kind of branch out maybe into other sedimentary records, depending on the expertise of the people in the working group and depending on kind of where things go. So Aquatic Transitions produced 2 publications. One of them was about the first human impacts recorded in lake sediment systems, and the second one was about disentangling human and climate impacts in these sedimentary records. And several of the committee members of Human Traces were part of that Aquatic Transitions working group. Moved on twice. So this is the Human Traces Steering Committee. The people outlined in pink are the people that are presenting and facilitating today. And we also have Keely Mills outlined in pink, who's our pages liaison. So I'm Maddy. You'll also see John and Tina, and there's a few other people from the committee around today. And if you were at our workshop yesterday, you've seen a few more, and we've got more of our committee tomorrow as well at the other workshop. And hopefully very soon you'll be able to meet us all in person. So this is the Human Traces Working Group is part of the Pages kind of structure, and you can see here the Pages pyramid that ties together the human, environment and climate themes. So Human Traces sits well within that human corner of these themes, and what we're hoping to do as a working group is link with the other working groups within this human theme to try and coordinate efforts to kind of build bridges between these other working groups, draw together that expertise to get a real overview of human traces in sedimentary records. And to do this, we have several aims. The first one is we want to contextualise the Anthropocene epoch in a long-term global perspective by synthesising records of human traces in geologic archives. So we really want to kind of like look at the whole pattern of human traces through time. And we want to start by considering lake sediment records, because that kind of follows on from what Aquatic Transitions did, but we're interested in bringing in other records to that, and particularly things like archaeology, that can give us kind of a more rounded view of human traces in these records. So to do that, we want to then, like I said, talk to the other working groups, and we want to identify the kind of proxy records that we can use to look at human traces through time, and which ones will be kind of the most useful for telling us about how humans have impacted and changed their environment. And we also then want to pick the archives that we're going to look at these proxies in. So we're going to do that in discussion with the working group to see kind of what arises and what seems like would be best. And once we've done that, we want to establish a database on human traces records. And this really is something that we want to produce that's actually going to be useful. So we want to do it in line with what the community actually needs and wants. So we'll be asking you kind of what you think is missing from the data that we currently have, and how you think we could best kind of archive this and store this and communicate this. And we'll be doing this by probably sending out another survey like the first one some of you may have answered, but also through more workshops. And speaking of more workshops, we have some planned activities coming up. We have our second workshop coming up in September, where we want to focus on the what is a human impact theme, and we'll also be trying to run workshops at several upcoming conferences, hopefully in person. So the ZIL, IPA, Paleolimnology and Limnology Conference in Argentina, and then the Pages OSM meeting as well, where we hope to run some workshops. As well as that, we also hope to start a summer school, and this really is for ECRs, where we kind of want to share best practice on looking at human traces in these sedimentary archives, and also to facilitate some networking for ECRs. So I mentioned the survey. Some of you will have filled this out, so we can go through some of the results of this survey now. So we asked you what you thought a human trace was, and these questions were kind of kept like deliberately open to just kind of really see what would come out of asking these questions. So there were 3 answers to what a human trace was. Some of you described it as any evidence of human activity. Some people described it as presence of exotic products, so things like foreign pollen that may have made it into the sedimentary record that wouldn't be there naturally. And the 3rd answer was evidence of the change in the system. So that's the kind of impact that humans have had on the system. Clearly, human traces can mean a lot of different things. And then we asked you about when humans become dominant. And again, this word dominant was kind of deliberately put there to make people kind of start thinking about this. And we know it's probably a controversial word, or not necessarily the best word. So we do also want to talk about the kind of vocabulary we should be using to describe human traces, and also come up with some proper definitions for what we mean, so we can actually start kind of talk about this stuff from a common understanding. So we asked about when human traces became dominant and when they accelerated, and we can see we actually got a range of very different answers, and this will be because in different regions human traces will have manifested differently in the sedimentary record. So we can see that some people see human traces from as early as 10,000 BP, and some people think that they only kind of start to become dominant from about 1950. This really does take in that huge span of time from the Paleoanthropocene all the way up to what people consider the Anthropocene today. And for dominance, there was a couple of, we asked you what it meant, and there were a few different ideas about what dominance meant. Some people described it as based on the number of proxies present. So dominance is where humans are impacting lots of different proxy archives. And some people describe dominance as the magnitude of impact. So it could just be one large impact on a single proxy record. We also asked about whether to look at human traces on a global or a regional scale. And again, there was a range of answers, but this one kind of most people thought a very similar thing, that a global synthesis should really come from a regional perspective. But actually, when we get closer and closer towards the present day, the regional perspective is less important, and we can actually really then look at the kind of overall global patterns. And finally, we asked you about what data you thought was missing from your region, because we're really interested in trying to kind of like get an overview of exactly what's happened where. And lots of people said that they don't think there's enough sites studied, and that we need more records to really actually understand human traces through time. And then a little bit about the people that answered the survey, what you do and what you're interested in. There was a nice coverage of different regions and coverage of different proxy records. And the kind of regions that were studied, the kind of number of people studying each region seems to match what we saw in the Aquatic Transitions publication of the regions with the most publications and most records studied. Most of you seem to study microfossils, and one thing that's really nice as well is that a lot of people that are interested in human traces are also members of other Pages working groups. So this is going to be really good for when we start to try and kind of like reach out to the other working groups and try and start to kind of start a dialogue on human traces through time. So for today, we have a few aims of the workshop today. Of course, this is our first workshop, so we're really interested to just get to know people. We also want to gather information on your ideas of human traces. We're really interested to continue to discuss those survey results, and particularly the vocabulary that we should be using and the definitions we need to give these words in order to properly describe human traces. And we also want to start an exchange on how to integrate all these approaches with the other working groups and also with the database. So something we've already started, and I'll share the link soon, is a map of first impact. So this is kind of like a test for something that we could do properly as an output of the working group, where we map the first human impacts around the globe. So I'll send the link, and if you want to, please add your site, either an archaeological site or a lake site. So click on your layer, click the add marker symbol, which is the little pin up there, and fill in some information about your site. We want to see if this is going to be a useful tool and something that we could actually develop properly as part of the working group output. Okay, so that's it for the introduction talk.